Hey guys, let's all stand up and praise the Lord.
guys, those of you that are here, those of you that are in classes, and those of you that are live streaming at home. So glad to have y'all here. Today we have somebody speaking that's very special to my heart. I've been knowing her since she was in about 10th grade. My 10th graders most of my 10th graders aren't in here. My 11th graders are in here. 10th graders are in class, except for my couple of kids on my worship team. But I've been knowing her since she was in about 10th or 11th grade, and she was, I was youth pastor back in the day, and she was in my youth group, and she was like a key person in my youth group, and then she became a key person in the college age group, and now she's a key person.
Hi guys, I'm glad to be here today, especially glad since I got held up in the office for about 10 minutes because they check your temperature and I'm like hot and sweaty just in general, but especially if I speak, and then especially if I stay in my car talking to my mom after I turned my car off. So I'm like, Mom, I have to go in. And then they couldn't get my temperature down because I was hot, and so I had to wait 10 minutes, but praise the Lord, I'm at 98 degrees, whatever, right? That's right, yeah, whatever, 89, I don't know. I'm something that's I'm allowed to be in here, so that's cool. I was like, I'm not sick. I don't feel hot and sweaty except like the normal hot and sweatiness, but they're doing a good job of defending your school against all things not healthy. So if you're watching online, hi, this is a little weird. If you're in your class right now, hey, I wish you could be in here. I love face-to-face interaction. I miss it whenever I can't be face-to-face with people. But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're all sitting here, some of us in the room. Today I just want to speak briefly to you. My sermon title is called God of the Ages. And it's really cool. I love when the worship songs kind of line up with what the speaker's about to say. And it was just really neat hearing the song say, "You've been so faithful. God, I can sing of your faithfulness over my life." And then the very next song went into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and God's faithfulness of being that other person in the fire. Because that's what today's about. I just wanted to speak. I'm sure a lot of you have thought a lot. You know, it's the year 2020. And if you're on Insta or Snapchat or TikTok, there's all these like memes, right? Like, who hasn't seen a meme about 2020? It's like, if 2020 was a giraffe, it would look like this. And it's like this crooked looking giraffe or whatever. Or it'd say, hey, if 2020 was this, it would, you know, there's so much being said right now about the year 2020, yes? Just shake your heads underneath your masks. This pandemic is that because historically pandemics were more isolated, right? Because it would happen here. There was a yellow fever outbreak here. There was this happening here. But now that we're worldwide kind of people and we're hopping on planes and traveling to other countries and doing this and that, this pandemic is worldwide. The world has literally stopped spinning in a sense. Every country has been affected. I know that in my business, we see the effects of the pandemic worldwide because we do like flooring and other stuff. And so like tile that's made in Italy, we can't get it right now because the Italians quit making tile because they're all sick or they're staying home because of the pandemic. And it doesn't matter. You know, I had a builder tell me the other day he can't get the little end caps for his closets. He does custom closets, and he's like, I've never had a back order on the end caps for my custom closets. But apparently they're made in India, and the people in India quit making them because of all the pandemic. And so here we are as an entire world, not just a nation, not just a community, saying, God, we're in 2020, we don't understand a single thing. And there's been prophecies about 2020, there's been predictions of people trying to guess what might happen or saying, God's saying this. I I don't know what God's saying in 2020, but I know he's saying stop and pay attention. This is a year unlike any other. And if you miss that, you have missed just such a big part of 2020. And so just as we go into this message, I know people are watching online, and so I'm a really, really bad online watcher. We realized that during virtual church in my house when we sat through Sundays of like you listen to worship and then you listen to the message, and I don't sit down for an hour and a half in my life generally ever. And so to sit down through an entire worship service, then a message, was just a little bit impossible for me. And by the third Sunday of our virtual church at our house in like March and April, my husband's like, you have to stop getting up during church. And I'm like, he's like, you did 3 loads of laundry during church, you unloaded the dishwasher, because I can't sit still. So what I wanted for you online people watching or people in classes feeling like I'm just sitting through another thing that I have to sit through now, I just wanted to keep it a little bit simple so that we don't lose our train of thought, because I lose my train of thought with anything online. It's difficult for me. But, so what are you doing? This is the question I have to start off with. What are you doing with your 2020? What are you doing with it? What are you doing with the changes God has brought about in your 2020? What are you doing? You personally, what are you doing? So there's some options, like we've done a lot of complaining about the year 2020. We've been a lot of just discouraged by the year 2020. There's been some hardships that we didn't count on happening in 2020, but what are you doing? So if this is the year unlike any other for you, how is it shaping you? How is it changing you? Are you going to come out of this as a generation who not only survived a pandemic and lived through it, but was changed by it? And of course, as Christians, we say, well, I want to be changed for the glory of God. That this impacted my life, because never before did I think that if you would be lying to me if you said, Miss Jamie, I thought when you sat in chapel last year, most of you are older. Miko said most of you are 11th graders, maybe 12th graders. You would be lying to me if you said, oh yeah, last year this time I thought maybe I'd be sitting in chapel spaced out from my friends with face masks on. That was weird, right? Like only people in other countries did that. We saw like China sometimes wore face masks and we're like, that's weird. And here we are. It looks unlike anything else. My daughter, so my kids go to school in Lafourche Parish. So we just started Monday. My kids go 8 days, Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday is our schedule. So Monday was our first day of real school. We don't have to sit in front of a computer. They got to get out of my car, praise the Lord, and go to school. And we love each other, but 6 months of loving each other is a really long time to love each other in close quarters. So my youngest daughter gets out of her car Monday morning, and she's like, Mom, and we're in car line, which, takes a little while. So she gets out the car, she says, Mom, it feels so good to see people besides my family. And I looked at her, because we haven't been that isolated. I'm like, Lucy, you have, and she goes, but you know what I mean, right? But I did. When I was driving away from school, processing her thoughts of, it just feels so good to be with other people, I thought, it feels good for her to be with people that she's not choosing. She has to go sit in class with people that she isn't choosing. She doesn't get to say, oh, you're my friend, I choose you. Because during the pandemic, we got to choose who we associated with, who we hung around. Oh, we're only being by these people. Because, that weird dynamic of it was only your family, maybe some close friends. And all of a sudden, she was thrown into a world of, I didn't choose any of these people, and I'm getting out my mom's car, and I don't even know who I'm going to see. And she said that felt good. And so it might even be people she doesn't even like. And that sometimes I think we miss that feels good. There's something good about being forced into certain situations where people might oppose you for who you are. They might say things like, that's not right, Lucy, in her class. Whereas we're encouraging and supporting her as a family, but maybe that classmate is just being like, whatever, you don't even know. And as we go out into the world as Christians, it should be a delight to us when the world sometimes opposes us, when we are around people who don't look like us, feel like us, think like us. And so when you re-enter the world of 2020 and you're kind of creeping back into different places, we are trying to be around people who don't look like us, don't act like us, don't think like us. And it's scary Because in this 2020 pandemic, for the first time, we have a pulse on what the whole world is thinking. You can click online and know what somebody far away is thinking, somebody close to home is thinking. One of a Christian lady who is on Facebook that I used to follow, she recently posted something, it was during the pandemic, that was very just like anti-Bible. Like she was calling it Christian, but it wasn't. It was not what the word says. And I got discouraged because I read all these comments of people applauding her decision, applauding it. And it was to me, outright sin against the holy God. I went, oh my gosh. And I started like looking at all the comments. There was thousands, over 3,000 comments of people saying, go girl, that's right. You know, she said, don't you dare come at me with the hate the sin, love the sinner line. And I'm like, even though Jesus used it, don't use that on her. And people were like, that's right, we're tired of people hating our sin. I'm like, okay, but God did, Jesus did. This doesn't line up. And over 3,000 people were just like, yes, yes, yes. And it really, for like a little day or two in my life, I got real discouraged about like, has the whole world gone crazy? Does no one care? And then I went back and I looked on her page because and I just looked. And she has 750,000 followers. Of those 750,000 followers, 3,000 about applauded her crazy. Applauded her just blatant decision to say, I'm going to write some new rules in the Bible that I say I love. It's like really confusing when Christians say they love the word, but then they change it up and just use it to fit their own lifestyle. And I thought, that's less than 0.5%. That's less than 1% of the people who actually follow her that are even applauding her decision. And then I noticed, when I went back in, I noticed what I had not noticed before. And that was that on her post before she made this big public announcement about some sin that she was choosing to applaud in her life and other people applauded, she said, and don't worry, when I make this announcement, I have my team ready, my social media team, to delete your comments and delete you off my page. Basically, if you don't line up with her, if what she's thinking is right, you're out. So there was this very skewed idea. I'm sure some people put things like, sweetheart, you're just wrong. We do love you, but this is wrong. So then you just got deleted off her page. Your comment was deleted, and she put that out there, letting you know you're just out. But what a skewed perspective. Because you could just glance on her page and think, gosh, like thousands of people think this way. What if I'm thinking wrong? But then you realize, wait, it's less than 1% of her followers. And anybody who did raise up a voice against her, she deleted and blocked off her page, her and her social media team. Like, we live in a world where social media distortion is so real. Like, we can say that it's not real, and maybe you're not struggling in one area of that distorted perspective, and you're like, no, I'm fine. I know everybody's not as happy as they say they are on social media. But then you look at something else and you think, because like I can be doing fine in one area, but then like I follow a lot of home bloggers and interior designers, and like I can convince myself that no one's, like my house is just disgusting. Like everything is outdated, nothing is good in it, and it's dirty. Because everybody else's house that I follow, it doesn't look like mine. We have real people who live in ours. And that's just a skewed perspective. It's distortion. And in the midst of all this, I think there's nowhere else has there been such distortion of truth in our culture. Whether it's false news, anyway, like false news is a real thing. I don't know. I don't always get into all that, but apparently it's a real thing. Whether it's somebody skewing your perspective just by deleting comments against her on a page that makes you think everybody else thought that was okay what she said. There's never been distortion of the truth like we see it now, like we see it in 2020. And so for just the next few minutes, I want us to focus on what do we do when the truth is distorted? What do we do when the world feels all wrong? Well, we focus on God, which always is the answer. And I just think let's do it this way, this time, and let's kind of work through it this way. So the passage that we're going to pull from is 2 Chronicles 20, 1 through 13. And it says, can I read it from here? After this, the Moabites and Ammonites, with some of the Menuhites, came to wage war against Jehoshaphat. Some people came and told Jehoshaphat, a vast army is coming against you from Edom, from the other side of the Dead Sea. It is already in Hazazon Tamar, that is, in Gedi. Alarmed, Jehoshaphat resolved to inquire of the Lord, and he proclaimed a fast for all of Judah. The people of Judah came together to seek help from the Lord. Indeed, they came from every town in Judah to seek him. Then Jehoshaphat stood up in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem at the temple of the Lord in front of the new courtyard and said, Lord, the God of our ancestors, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can withstand you. Our God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham, your friend? They have lived in it and have built in it a sanctuary for your name, saying, if calamity comes upon us, where the sword of judgment or plague or famine, we will stand in your presence before this temple that bears your name and will cry out to you in our distress, and you will hear us and save us. But now, here are men from Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, whose territory you would not allow Israel to invade when they came from Egypt. So they turned away from them and did not destroy them. See how they are repaying us by coming to drive us out of the possession you gave us as an inheritance. Our God, will you not judge them? For we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And all the men of Judah, with their wives and their children and little ones, stood there before the Lord. So you have this image of King Jehoshaphat. He's a king. And he hears word that there's an approaching army, huge armies. If you know anything that ends in "ite" in the Bible, they're bad. The Ammonites, the Moabites, they're bad. Okay, so just know that they're bad and mean, and they will destroy your community. They will burn your homes, take your women, and make your children slaves while they kill the men. So that's who's coming after them, massive armies. And Jehoshaphat says, God, I don't know what to do. What are we supposed to do? So he just gathers. He says, let us, in verse 3, he is resolved to inquire of the Lord. And so when we are staring at something that feels so big, this army against us, the very first step one is always like verse 3, that just says, Jehoshaphat resolved to inquire of the Lord, and he proclaimed a fast for all of Judah. Step one is always, well, let's seek the Lord. And we say things like that, like, well, let's seek the Lord. But what does that practically look like? For Jehoshaphat, it looked like this. He gathered all the people. And you see this image of every man standing with his wife, with his children, holding their babies, standing on the front section of the temple. And they're saying this to the Lord. They're saying, Lord, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And it's always about what our eyes are looking at and what direction we're facing, who we're trusting in, that we would always hear his voice above the roar of the others. And I do believe that your generation, as you're rising up, becoming adults, that you're a generation that hears a roar of noise around them like no other generation ever before. The noise is relentless. That there's constant noise in your lives, whether it's coming from social media driven, whether it's simply the fact that there's always technology at our fingertips. I think we walk around texting. That's so foreign, that concept. For you, you've grown up with it. It's so normal. For me, we did not have the internet in my house until college. I just need you to get your mind around the fact that whenever we had a question, I was at Lugaville. So in the Lugaville house, when we had a question and we didn't know the answer, my mom had a set of encyclopedias that we opened. That's how we learned things, was an encyclopedia. Who even has encyclopedias anymore, right? We're going to Google that. I didn't learn about Google until I was a junior in college, and me and my friend, I still remember it so, she's like, I have to show you this website called Google. And so for this brief moment of time, we made our middle names Google. Her name was Emily, mine was just Jamie, still is. But anyway, we were like, Jamie, Google, Lugaville, and she was Emily, Google, Guidry, Schatzel now. But life is really weird and crazy, and but we thought Google was the coolest thing, and it clearly is, But that's the world we grew up in versus your world of you can Google anything. So my son yesterday, my 15-year-old, he Googles. So I said, he took his driver's ed, right? So after driver's ed, you go get a tip, right? Am I saying this right? This is my first kid driving, so I'm a little lost. So he gets a tip, a temporary instruction permit. But apparently he still has to go back and take a test at his place because he did virtual driver's ed. And we're trying to take this test so that he can get his real permit, whatever that means. And so yesterday he Googles. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to take you to go take your test. Okay. I said, you need to call them, find out where we need to go. Like, this is on you. You're 15. If you want to drive, you do it. I'm not doing a thing. I don't care if you never drive. So if you want to drive, do the stuff. And so he tells me he does. He's like, hey, Mom, yeah, we're going to go at 1, and here's the address. He plugs the address into my phone. And he went to Dufresne's driving school, virtually though. So he never had actually went to the driving school. He did virtual driver's ed. So we're driving to Lockport, which is like 30-ish minutes away from my house, and the whole time I'm like, I just feel like maybe Dufresne's is in Thibodaux. And he goes, no, Mom, I looked it up. Okay, all right. We get there. We're at a house. The address he Googled led us to a house with clearly there were some people named Dufresne or something living there. Like maybe the people who operate the driving school live out of there. I don't even know. So we call the driving ed, which is what I told him to do the first time. And they're like, we're in Thibodaux and Talbot Avenue, which is another 40 minutes. We're from Lockport, just to drive the long way. So we're almost like an hour and a half into this round trip that it should have taken me 15 minutes. I can get to Talbot Avenue in 15 minutes from my house. So we're an hour and a half into this trip because he Googled. And I said, I told you to call. He goes, Mom, I just Googled that. Well, Google gives you false information sometimes. Like it just does. It's going to give you a roar of false information that you might think is correct, but it can be very, very wrong. And that's what happened to us yesterday. It was very wrong. But you are constantly getting roared at by social media, by opinions. You know, people used to live in isolation, like literally lived on farms that they didn't see people for days. We don't have that. No one you know doesn't see people for days at a time. You know, and you Google everything. You have this roar of information being flooded into you about what is this or what is that. And so it's never been noisier than now. Never. There's never been so much information thrown at you. And there's another man in the Bible who I think had a roar in his life, and his name is Moses. He was 40 years an Egyptian, this Moses. 40 years. So I'm 40 years old, so like Moses was my age. He lived in Egypt for 40 years. Egypt was a noisy society. They were loud, they were constantly doing things, they were constantly evolving, and Moses lived in the Pharaoh's place. He was like a foster son to the Pharaoh, in line to become, it was very, very, very noisy for him, this constant palace living, this constant pressure, this constant, no, Moses, you have to look like this. The Egyptians cared a lot about physical appearance. That's why you see the guys with the eyeliner and shaved, they would shave like all their facial hair, all their body hair. They cared a lot about their physical appearance, this roar of a noisy culture saying, you have to live up to this standard, you have to do this. Oh, and by the way, we worship like 40 different gods. The God of the sun, yep, we're gonna worship that one. The God of this, yep, we're worshiping that too. Make sure this roar of culture. So for 40 years, Moses lives in this culture that's roaring at him, saying, this is the way we live, this is the way life looks like, this is how we're gonna do it. And all of a sudden, Moses kills an Egyptian and he's kicked out the culture at 40 years old. And he finds himself in a wilderness of sorts, in a desert where he eventually actually meets his wife. He raises his family. And then he spends 40 years out just like being a shepherd, basically, right? Watching his father-in-law's flocks, not even his own. The Bible is clear, it wasn't even Moses's. And there's 40 years of silence for Moses. He steps out of Egyptian culture, which is fast-paced. They're learning the alphabet. They're the smartest culture on the face. The Egyptians were, like, these were the people to be, you know? Like, he was a part of that. And he steps out and is just in silence for days at a time. And so he lives 40 years as a nomad, basically, just living from place to place with his father-in-law. And at the end of those 40 years, so now he's 80, all of a sudden, God shows up for Moses in a burning bush, which we're like, that's amazing. I would totally notice a burning bush. But here's the trick about that desert where Moses was, is that burning bushes actually weren't that uncommon. They were pretty common because the desert's so hot, the bushes are so dry, and they have lots of these, it's a certain kind of mineral that reflects the sun. So not often, but fairly regularly, bushes would be set on fire. So you would pass by a burning bush and be like, oh, not a big deal. But not Moses. After 40 years of silence, he leans into what he sees as maybe this is something different. And he says, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why does this bush not burn up? Because see, burning bushes were super, super common in where Moses was from. But the uncommon thing is that this bush was burning, but it didn't burn up. But you know what? Moses at 40 probably would have just went right past that burning bush because he was so consumed in a culture that shouted at him continually, that said, hey, like, this is more important, be this, do that. And Moses looked at that burning bush after 40 years of quiet living and said, let me see why this bush is not burning up. And that's where God meets him. That's where. It says seek first in Matthew. It says seek first the kingdom of God. And Moses, by stopping to turn to this bush, he seeks God. Just like Jehoshaphat did. He said, but I'm going to seek the Lord and see what God has for this, for these people with these vast armies against me. Moses does a similar thing, and the Lord shows up. And that's just point two, is that we view God as the God of the ages. Your temptation and my temptation is to view God as who I see him now in 2020. Well, I see God as this. I see God as this. I see him doing this. But he is the God of the ages, of all time and forever. In verse 6, Jehoshaphat reminds God of who he is, which is ironic because God hasn't forgotten who he is, but Jehoshaphat and his people are very, very tempted to forget who God is. And it says this, that Jehoshaphat said, Lord, the God of our ancestors, hey, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can withstand you. Jehoshaphat, in essence, reminds God, hey, you are the God of the ages. You are the God of my father and his father and his father. And you, this is who you are. You rule over all nations. No one can withstand you. But he didn't need to remind God. He needed to remind himself. And there are days in our lives when I think we need to remind ourselves, God, you are the God of the ages. If you come from a Christian lineage, that is a beautiful thing. Like if you can trace your Christianity back for generations, that's amazing. My Christianity goes back one generation. I get to say, God, you're the God of my mom and dad. And it kind of ends there. And like, you know, I did have a great-grandfather who was a preacher, so that's like cool. But that was like on my dad's side. But when you can say, God, you are the God of my mom and dad, you are the God of my grandma and grandpa, you know, like, you did miracles for them, and you're going to do it for me. And if you don't have a Christian lineage, you find people in the Bible, like it talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you were the fourth man in their fire. Find Christians who would tell you their story and say, I have this miracle that's amazing that only God could have done. That he's the God of the ages, always, forever. There's no escaping who he is or what he's done. No one can stand against it. That's what Jehoshaphat said, that you've always been. And God said the same thing about himself when he spoke to Moses. When he spoke in that burning bush, he said, I am. When he said, Moses said, who am I going to tell the people you are? And he said, I am who I am. Moses only knew a bunch of gods in Egypt. And this God was God of the sun. This God was God of the river Nile. This was the God of blood. They worshipped a blood god. They worshipped a god of this certain bug and just all these random things. And the real God says, no, but I am who I am. What kind of answer is that, right? Like if you say, Miss Jamie, who are you? I am who I am. But it's really translated in like, I be who I be. As in, I'm not changing. That he's transcendent. Because we are changing. We are evolving. We are people who change. If you talk to me, so in college, remember I told you I was Jamie, Google, Luca Bill, because I was so impressed by Google. I'm no longer so impressed by Google. I'm not like going to tell you, y'all, I found the coolest website. It's called Google. You would think I was insane. Like, Miss Jamie, we all know about Google. Like, it's, you know, I've changed. God is not. I am who I am. I be who I be. I'm not changing. I'm transcendent above all. He's not rocked by a single thing going in our world. He's not rocked by the violence we've seen erupt in our country. He's not rocked by a worldwide pandemic. His absolute being means that he is constant. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. And that's what Jehoshaphat acknowledged in verse 6. God, you are the God of my ancestors. So you were there for them, and you're here for me. And then step 3, whenever we're saying, God, what are we going to do with this vast army facing us? Whatever your army is, maybe you don't care about the pandemic. That's cool. You probably have another army that you're trying to fight in your life. Maybe it's something so different than what any of us are fighting. What do you do then? So we should remember, step 1 is we say, we seek the Lord. Step 2 would be that we're going to walk in and say, you are the God of the ages. I am who I am. And number 3 is we remind ourselves of what he's already done and the people who have gone before us. We see that in verse 7 from the Jehoshaphat story. Our God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it to us forever to the descendants of Abraham, your friend? That wasn't Jehoshaphat's generation. He's reminding himself and the Lord of what the Lord has gone before and done. He's saying, hey, I remember what you did for this ancestor of mine. You know, and some people, like, somebody was talking to me the other day, and they just kind of loosely used the word, you know, like if we're starting the end of all time, then there's going to be more pandemics. There's going to be more violence. That's biblical. We see that in the Bible, that as the world nears an end, that sickness would rise up, natural disasters would rise up. And so it just really kind of stuck with me, one little sentence of like, is this the end? I don't know. Because, you know, here's the truth. It's felt like the end for a lot of people in a lot of different generations have said, this is it. This is the end. There was a German theologian, so a theologian's like a Bible scholar, so he was super scholarly. He lived during Hitler, and he was in this plot to assassinate Hitler. So if you can imagine, like, Bible theologian, plot to assassinate, it doesn't even get any weirder than that, right? Because, like, really, like, would you pick the pastor of your church as an assassin? Like, no. So weird, right? So the world was flipped on its head. And this guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer was part of this assassination plot. And really all he had done before was write scholarly things on the Lord. And so Bonhoeffer, he gets arrested. It wasn't successful, obviously, his plot. And so Bonhoeffer, he's sitting in the cell that he will eventually die in. The Lord does not rescue him, does not save him. He dies 2 months before the war ends, and he would have been released. And he reads an inscription on the wall that another prisoner had wrote and said, in 100 years, this will all be over, right? Like whatever you're facing, it's going to be over one way or the other in 100 years. And Bonhoeffer wrote something, and he said it like this. He put, in his letter he was writing to someone from his cell, he apologizes. He says, I'm sorry that I sound so apocalyptic, that I keep talking of the end of the world, because they thought, this is it, Lord, you're coming soon. And here we are almost 100 years after Bonhoeffer wrote these things. It's been 80 years roughly. They would have never imagined that it would continue on. And so we are not the first discouraged generation. We are not the first people who say, is this what the end is about to look like? We're not. If you look throughout history, there's been horrific things throughout history where people have said, this is it, we can't possibly survive this. You know, like, we are not the first people who long for the good old days. It cracks me up when younger people, and I would still be considered young by some older people, we're like, oh, do you remember when? And like, we're all longing for pre-corona time. Like, right? We just look back at our last school year at this time and think, oh, remember when you sat next to your friend in chapel and you could whisper back and forth, because now y'all can't even whisper because you're spaced out? Right? That was the good old days. We could have snuck a note to each other, but now we can't because we're 3 seats apart. That was the good old days, right? Because we're all longing for the good old days. There's something deep within every one of us. So you're longing for the good old days of complete shalom. Shalom means peace. So every generation has longed for that. And it hasn't been found since the disruption of sin in the Garden of Eden. When the cosmos cracked, we're all saying, but I'm longing for something that doesn't feel like this. We aren't the first generation to long for something different. It happened during World War II. It happened during earlier wars. It happened during other pandemics. Sometimes you simply need to remind yourself of what the Lord has done for other people. And so maybe that's people in the Bible. If you don't have anyone in your life, you could say, well, you know what, the Lord, you could read this chapter that we're pulling from in 2 Chronicles, because the end of the story is the Lord rescues mightily Jehoshaphat and his people. They don't even have to fight. The Lord fights their battles for them, and all those bad Ammonites and Moabites are dead. That's the end of that story. So you could remind yourself of that. Sometimes you just need to simply remind yourself of what good is going on around you. One of my best friends, Miss Teresa, and I know she's my friend, but I call her Miss Teresa because she's older than me. She's just one of my best friends, and she said, you know, Jamie, sometimes I simply say to my husband, I need you to look me in the eye and tell me one good thing that God is doing. Just one. Because see, that gives us hope to go on and live tomorrow. Because when your day has felt discouraging and you feel disappointed by the people, by the Christians around you, you might just need to find that one person who can say, hey, but listen, God is doing this one thing, and it's so good. It's so good. And, if it's not a person who can tell you one thing that he's done, sometimes you just need to team up with someone who can say, we can fight this together. Jehoshaphat called in all the people. He didn't sit quaking in his cold kingdom saying, oh God, what do you have me to do? He called in all the people. And then they in turn called in their people. Like the men of the family called their wives. They stood together. So the worst part of the social isolation is that we can feel very, very alone. Get you a person who can tell you what the Lord is doing. Because the Lord is still doing good things. He's still working miracles. You might not be able to see them from where you're at, but somebody else can say, but the Lord has done this, and I can't ever forget it. Find a person who can tell you what the Lord has done. That's what Jehoshaphat did. Lord, you did this for my ancestors. And see, we have miracle stories in my family. We have miracles of God healing people. We have miracles of life and just real, real miracles. And I left last night. Last night I dropped off a kid who comes into our family periodically. We had fostered him for 8 months, and he's no longer in foster care, but we still go pick him up. And so, especially since March, when he's had no school, he comes with us for weeks at a time. So last night I dropped him off. He had an appointment this morning. And so I'm dropping him off at almost 9 o'clock at night in the middle of this scariest part of the east side of town. And so I get out the car, and I'm surrounded by people immediately who don't look like me. They're men, they're big, they're scary. And I'm like, hey, just dropping off Jari, whatever. And there was these 3 men right here, and then from behind my car came 6 more. And I'm just standing in the midst of all of them as I drop him off at a place so his mom comes out from out the house, and she's talking to me, and we're talking for a little minute. And she had they just got kicked out of their one house, so they're in another, and they don't have air conditioning. She's like, oh, Miss Jamie, do you know anybody who's selling a used AC unit, a window unit, so they can have some air conditioning? And so I'm like, yeah, no, I don't really know, and I can check into whatever. But I pulled out of there, and so they were at a different place, so I had put the GPS on my car. So on the car GPS, you know how you can see the houses? Have y'all seen that before, where you're driving and you see the hundreds of houses around you? They're little gray dots on the GPS, but they look like the shape of the house. You can even tell if it's a trailer or a house. I don't know if y'all cars does that. Okay, mine does that. So I'm looking, I get back in my car, my GPS is pulled up. And so right before I went to pull it into reverse to try to back out without hitting any of these people, these men who had surrounded my Suburban, I'm like, okay, Lord, help me not hit somebody in the dark. And so I'm pulling, but I looked at my GPS, and there were hundreds of dots of houses. And I thought, God, this is one boy in the midst of hundreds of houses that have such ache and heartache and hard times. And I'm dropping him off. And he just came off of a week of living with us where I don't get why we're so blessed. I'm not worrying about air conditioning in my house. That's not stressing me out. We just, even if it breaks, we just call the AC people. It's not a big deal. I'm not worried about what food is coming up next. The stories he tells. And I saw these houses, and I thought, this is one boy. And just on my GPS, I could see hundreds of houses in this little cluster where we were. I thought, I don't even think I'm making a difference. This isn't even making a difference. He's one boy. There's 100 houses just right here on my GPS. So if each house, he has 9 people living in his house. And I'm thinking, that's a lot of people, God. And what are you going to do with just one? What's going to come of that? And just so strongly, I felt like the Lord said, it only took one person for Moses' life to be completely changed, and he changed generations. He led his people out of Egypt. He led them out. Jamie, just trust me with the one that you've been given, because that's all that you can manage to help right now. That's all that you can do. It is enough. And so I would just say that in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of all the noise of the world telling you, hey, be this, do that, go there, look like this, and what are you going to do about the pandemic? find who the Lord would send you to. Find out what miracle God has for you that you could tell future generations. And go to somebody you trust who's a Christian and say, I need to know about a miracle that the Lord has done for you. Because if I stood on this stage and recounted the miracles of God in our lives, you would be amazed. Like, there's just moments where I shouldn't be standing here. You know, like the miracles are that real. The miracles are that good. If you would sit with me, I would tell them to you. Find you someone who you can say, the Lord has done this for her. Surely he can do it for me, to help you keep walking forward. That we don't just stay mired in the discouragement that we're tempted to rest in. And we would say, if you could do this one miracle for me, for her, you could do it for me. And I told you earlier, I was talking to my mom in the car, and I was telling her about my drop-off last night of the boy who lives with us sometimes. And I was just like, man, Mom, like, well, you know, what am I to do? You know, he's going back to virtual school. He's going to fail. I love him, but just the truth is he's going to fail. And I was like, he can't even read. He's in 3rd grade. He can't even read. And so, and my mom so faithfully reminded me of 2 other boys who they were in our lives a long time ago, like 12 years ago, which is like, Jamie, you need to think back on, and she named 2 other boys who were in our house for a while, and they were teenagers, and she's like, they couldn't read really either, remember? And I was like, yeah, I know. And she's like, but you just trust that God would do as he has and planned for his life. But that's hard, right? It's hard to trust God in the hard places when you drop off somebody to a house that's, they were sweating. It was terrible. I'm like, oh, Jahari, do you even have food? Here, like I sent him with some food. And you think, God, like, why do I get to live this life over here? Like, you know, like we're going to have the world's best Labor Day weekend. That's what's on our agenda. I leave here, I go to work, I do some work, I go home, and we're about to have like an amazing Labor Day weekend. It's just the truth. Like, I know he's not, and I know that there's people all over the world who's not. And I can't escape that, what the Lord has given me. And I don't want you to escape either what the Lord has given you. Don't be so discouraged that you fail to see the miracles that are in your life, that are all around you. The miracles that have already happened and the miracles that are yet to come. Be the generation who rises up and says, God, you've given us more than I can ever imagine. God, you've been so real. I cannot possibly escape what you're about to do. Don't let it pass you by. Don't be distracted by what's going on around you, what's in the world. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Seek the Lord. Remind yourself of who he is, and remind yourself of the miracles that he's done. It's that simple. It's not complicated to follow Jesus. We have tried to make it complicated, but it's really not. He loves you greatly in spite of who we are. All right, so we're going to pray. We'll close out. Love you guys. Praying for some normalcy soon. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for every heart here. Lord, I pray that you would open us up to greater things that you have for us. God, that we would not be content. God, that we'd seek you, Lord, that we would remind ourselves of who you are, who you've been, and who you're going to be. God, that we would be wide open for any miracle you have waiting. Lord, that you're good. You're a good, good Father, that you love us, and you've been so faithful in our lives and in the lives of others around us. And that's who you are. You don't change. We do, but you do not. You are the I am who I am. You destroy armies. God, you destroy our enemies. You awaken revival. And we pray that you would do all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Miss Jamie. It was awesome. Thank you guys. I know y'all, from paying attention, y'all did a great job in here this morning. We're trying to stay on schedule, and it's exactly the time you're supposed to go. So y'all have a great day, and move on to second period. Love y'all.